I'm excited to welcome onto the podcast, Kathy Oneto. Kathy, it's so good to chat to you on this show. Thanks for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here, Leanne. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, Kathy, you have a podcast, and I love the name. It's quite provocative. It's teaming up two words that you don't usually find together, right? So sustainable ambition. And so for me, ambition is like going hard, and then sometimes I have to have a break and like literally just cancel the ambition before I go again. I love this idea of making it sustainable. Can you share what that term and phrase means to you? What sort of caught your interest when you thought of it?
hmm Yeah. And what's interesting about it is it really, and I'll talk about this a little bit, it has a dual time component to it. So let me just say the concept for me, sustainable ambition, is about crafting fulfilling work while also living a fulfilling life from decade to decade. But within that, so that's the temporal piece, the longer term piece, maintaining a career over time is a part of it. But then the end goal is also to experience more joy in our personal and professional lives with more ease and less angst and guilt while still being ambitious. And so there's a lot packed in there, but the second part of this, right? Like as I started to come up with this is that people will often say to me, I love my work, but how I'm operating right now isn't sustainable. And so part of this is, and I don't personally believe in this term work-life balance. I think it's partly part of the reason why we struggle so much is that we use this term that I think sets an unrealistic expectation. And so I think the reason I don't like it is because it's hard to be in equilibrium all the time. And so I think about instead like building resilience and being proactive and supporting yourself while you're stretching yourself. And I think about that and thinking about being sustainable over, say, 18 months versus just day to day. So there's a lot of things built in there, but that's kind of, where sustainable ambition came from was really these two components. How do I manage my career and my ambitions over time? And
Mhm.
stay engaged, et cetera. But then how do I also sustain myself over the shorter period as well?
Yeah, it's so good because usually it's only sometimes in those gaps where I think about, oh, sustainable, the whole working on the business thing is when I'm not actually sort of running hard. And then you think, oh, I've got so much to do. And then you, like you said, then you get that feeling of guilt. Like I should have been incorporating this day to day. Guilt really plays out a lot. What I am interesting, I mean, there's so many elements we could sort of dive into, but I want to double click on, I love that Tim Ferriss phrase, double click on, you said decade to decade. Can you share why that time frame came into sort of your value proposition?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I've kind of thought about my career ever since I jokingly say, like when I was starting to look at colleges and what I wanted to major in. And this was, I'm the youngest of five, so I had a lot of siblings ahead of me. So there were these college books sitting around. This is pre-internet. I know that's hard to believe, but yes. And we had these books, and I was going through and I was like circling and highlighting like majors that I thought I might think of, be interested in. And so, I've always kind of used my career as like a touchstone as I've gone through my own career. And yet, when I hit 40, despite being really thoughtful about things, what I thought was being really thoughtful about things, I was really surprised at hitting a road bump and kind of experiencing just dissatisfaction with my career and noticing that my satisfaction and my ambition was shifting. And I was hearing it from a lot of people in my network. And so, as I started to research with people career transitions, I started to notice that there are differences between what we're trying to do in our 20s, what we're doing in our 30s, 40s, and beyond in terms of, both what's happening for ourselves in terms of our own adult development and getting to know ourselves better, but also what's happening in our lives and how that starts to impact how we want to think about our ambitions and about our careers and how we show up. And so that's what kind of brought me to thinking about this kind of decade to decade concept.
Thank you for sharing that. So I'm 39 in September, and I feel like I've started maybe a year early on what you're talking about, because there's really some radical like exploration and rethinking and going, look, I did all this stuff and that was good. It's done, but now I want to move on to something else. And it's more about like having impact now, as opposed to probably in your 20s and 30s where it's just surviving and having fun. Of course, I still want to have fun, but there's just different questions that are coming up as well. And also like, wow, 40, like it just even that number is like when we were younger, it just felt like such an old number, but I don't feel old at all. Like like just super young. So what are your tips for sort of navigating, and what kind of questions should you ask yourself to get started on on exploring the next decade?
Well, I think I always advise, like, I think where people often jump to is, especially when they're in a career inflection point, is they often jump right to, oh, what job do I want to do next? And I need to go apply for things. And often people get a little caught off guard with all of this, and they haven't been paying attention. I say often, like, pay attention, because we're not often attuned to ourselves. And so again, even when I did the research with career people who went through career transition, oftentimes I would hear they just are like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And a lot of my coaching clients will say that. And I hear it from a lot of people like, well, I just don't know what I want to do. And so, but the thing is, the only person who's going to know is you. And so, and that's really, you want to direct your own life. And so where you need to start is really with tuning into yourself and really starting to understand yourself, and like, what is the vision for your life? What do you value for your life and for your work? What value do you want to put out into the world? How do you want to contribute? And I encourage people to really start there, because if you don't get that foundation right, then when you start to go look for the next opportunity, then you don't really know what good is, right? You don't know what to evaluate against. And I think what's important, especially as you're going from decade to decade as well, is that just having this insight that your values can shift. The other thing that people don't realize is there are these adult stages of development, and that we can grow and change throughout our adult life. And that means that we start to attune and align more to ourselves. And so as we grow, right, our values can shift, things can change. And then let's admit, right, all of us, our lives change as we get older. Some people are going to have families. Like, the work world, ignores that, because we're still based on this kind of structure of professional life where it was like men went to the office, women stayed home and cared for the family. Well, that's of course no longer the case, and hasn't been for some time. And yet our work world doesn't necessarily take that into consideration. And also that roles in families have changed. Men are doing more for the family as well. So how do we accommodate these different aspects? So there are a lot of different factors to consider when people are thinking about these transitions. But the first place to start is really to tune into yourself and what you're looking for now.
Yeah. And look, I think that it's such a great phrase, tuning into yourself, because it's so easy to not do that and tune into what everything else, like hopping onto Instagram and thinking maybe that's what I want. And like, it's really hard sometimes to like filter out what's going on around you to really dial into and get that, like, that frequency that you need as well. You spoke about career transitions and you work with people that are going through those. I'm really keen to hear your story and your career transition. I know you had a very successful career in corporate. And we got listeners here that both work internally and probably also want to escape as well and work externally. So can you share a bit about your background and how you successfully navigated that?
Yeah, so I spent about 20 plus years in corporate, and my background is in branding and marketing. And I worked in both large and small companies, and also on like what's called like client side. It's such, may not mean anything until you say, and I also worked on the agency side or a consulting side where you're partnering with clients and doing work. And so I've had a pretty well-rounded background in that. And, I think I just got to a point where I always had a little bit of entrepreneurial tendencies. I ended up studying business for both undergrad and graduate school. And part of that inspiration was I thought I wanted to start a business someday. And then coming out of business school, I had taken an entrepreneurship class while I was in business school, had kind of thought maybe I might, had played with a business plan while in school, and then had also worked with some startups after going to corporate and coming, et cetera. So, so I always had these inklings of kind of wanting to do something on my own. And then I also got to a point where I think my ambitions shifted too, where I started to realize I just wanted to have more ownership in something, and more ownership in both my IP and just whatever I was going to go build. And then even I'm not a mother, but I also was really seeking more flexibility. I tend to be someone, which it sounds like you are too, Leanne, that runs hard. Like, I'm a hard worker. I have high level of responsibility, high level of conscientiousness. Like, I tend to work hard. And so if I'm, and yet I still felt like I needed and wanted more flexibility in how I was managing my time and my energy, frankly.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was, this is like probably 10 years ago, I worked for a government company, and I actually I just wanted to work 4 days a week for no reason. I just wanted Wednesdays off, and they granted that to me. And I remember getting my hair cut on a Wednesday, and the lady's like, "Oh, so yeah, do you have kids?" And I'm like, "No, I just work 4 days a week." And she's like, "Why?" And I'm like, well, why not? Like, it's the best. Felt so recharged. I think I ran a marathon this year because I could just do more in that one day off, and totally love the flexibility. Now, because you come from a marketing and branding background, I've got to ask you, running your own business, was it easy to brand yourself, or did you find that a bit of a challenge?
This is one where I have a colleague and I talk about this, where it's kind of like the cobbler has no shoes, right? And yet I also was very thoughtful in how I've branded things. And yet, even with that thoughtfulness, it's no different than any other business where you can't predict exactly where things are going to go. And so sometimes things start to get messy. So like when you very well know, Leanne, like when you go out on your own, you can kind of choose to, hey, is it just me? Am I Leanne Hughes, right? Am I Kathy Oneto consulting and coaching, or do I want to create kind of an entity? And so those are strategic choices that you have to make in doing that. And, so when I started out and stepped out on my own, because you asked me about that, I did do that gradually. But yet that did end up going out on my own. And I have a consulting practice under the agency Oneto, which still utilizes my name, but I positioned it that way for a particular reason and strategically. And then when I created Sustainable Ambition, again, chose to do that as opposed to saying just Kathy Oneto coaching, for example. And so I was thoughtful about it, but things can still get messy over time, because you're like, what's happening? Do these things come together? Do they not? Should that have just been Kathy Oneto consulting and coaching? Because now both of these things can live under one. They're strategic choices that you make.
And you've just got to make them and go, right? Like, because that's a problem, is like, just even if hesitating on that decision, we'll just you just need to just make a decision, move on, know that you can iterate in future. But I mean, the reason I just pick my personal brand is because I can't make a decision at all. So this gives me like the complete freedom to be like, this is what I'm an expert in today, and then tomorrow I might do this instead. But your website, like your brand, it just looks beautiful, and everything is like just so consistent. I love seeing your work. And plus the planners that you've created, can you share with our listeners? That's super cool. Like, you created a tangible product,
Yes.
just to share your ideas and reflections. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two. I have them here actually, but I don't know if you're using the video,
Gorgeous.
Leanne.
Yeah.
But yeah, I created a Sustainable Ambition. It's a 12-month workbook and planner, and I call it your Life Plus Work Resilience RX, or prescription. And this is really the aspect part of this. It does blend both the long-term aspect that I was talking about earlier, but it really was more designed to kind of help people with that 12 to 18 month horizon of how do I create things that are a little bit more sustainable for myself between my life and work. And so it takes you through this idea of, well, what are my ambitions for the next 12 to 18 months? How do I start to, create a plan so that while I'm thinking about stretching myself, I'm also proactively thinking about how I'm going to sustain myself. And also, when you're creating the whole reason I talk about resilience as prescription is because there isn't a one size fits all. We all work differently. We all have different priorities. We need to write our own prescription for what's really going to sustain us. So the planner just helps you to think through all of that, and then provides some structure for checking in along the way over the course of a year.
Amazing. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. It just looks so beautiful. Like, even the cover and the
Oh, thank you.
design, it's like a kind of, you see it and you want to open it and work with it. It's like, it and get, it just has that feeling when you see it. On that concept of, you talk about, what work and life and how they are integrated. What does work and live large like mean to you when you hear that phrase?
It's interesting because I, thought about this, Leanne, and thought, well, what's the antithesis of this? Like, work and live small, right? And it's kind of like really struck me in that, where it's like, well, who wants to work and live small, right? I mean, so to me, it's about how do you allow yourself to fully step into life and work in the way that you want to, and to make the contribution and the impact that you want to. What do you want to kind of get out of life and out of work? And kind of how do you show up as your full best self in doing that each and every day?
That's a really great, that's probably better than anything that I wrote. So thank you, Kathy. I will probably take that tagline and just like bring it into all the marketing for the shows. But even just starting with like the reframe, we're just like, what is the opposite of that? And you're right. I mean, I laughed when you said work and live small. Like, that is not and ambition for anyone. We spoke before about careers, and sometimes like things in life now, they aren't linear. There's things that are going that can like disrupt us and move us around, and we can move sideways, we can accelerate. I'm curious if there's anything that's happened in your life which has been like a watershed moment, something where you said yes to an opportunity and something amazing happened as a result of one decision. Has that happened to you before?
I kind of, when I think about this, and there's a lesson in here, and there's a lesson in here for me, even as I reflect back sometimes on these types of questions. And for me, this is when I went away to college. I grew up on the West Coast in the United States, and I went back east for school. And I just, for some reason, wanted to go back east for school. And I got lucky that I got in. I got lucky that my dad was willing to pay for that school because it was a lot more expensive than just staying in state in California. And that was a watershed moment. If I had not taken that chance, and I was not fearful of doing it at all. And I went to a school, I had never visited it. I didn't know anybody who was going there. I was put on a plane with 4 suitcases by myself. No one flew out with me. And I just made it work. And, that kind of, it's funny. I would never think of myself as a courageous person. And I've learned over time, like, wow, I was quite courageous at those times. And I did a similar thing leaving college. I went and I moved to New York. And I got, again, very lucky. This time, at least, my sister helped me move in. But I lived by myself. I was very lucky that I found a studio apartment I could afford. And that was, again, a watershed moment, because I never, when you step into new experiences like that, I just got exposed to things that I had no idea about, right? Prior to that, you don't even know what's a possibility if you haven't been exposed to it.
It is. It's like that, the whole ladder of learning and the unconscious incompetence where you don't even know what you don't know. And that's the hard thing. Fine with my sustainable ambition. The hard thing about it being sustainable is sometimes I'll just do things because I get a fear of missing out, because maybe if I go to this event, or maybe if I take this opportunity on, something amazing will happen, because I don't know, like the future isn't promised to us. We have no idea what will happen. So that the hardest part, I mean, something I've learned over the last couple of years is getting better at saying no, just to the temptation of what cool things could happen as a result of doing this. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, did you want to add to
Well,
that?
I was just going to say, like, but it's actually one of the things I kind of advocate, though, too. And you're right, Leanne, you have to kind of be discerning of, like, what do you want to say yes to and what do you want to say no to? But I almost think that too often people are actually implicitly saying no, not realizing it. So I kind of advocate, you need to be planting seeds. And over time, as I've worked with sustainable ambition, I've kind of learned through my own interviews with people too, where I start to hear people say, well, what's your advice to people at a younger age? Take more risks. And I'm like, you know what? No, we need to be taking risks always. And one of my, people I had on my podcast also talked about, like, I forget his exact term, but he essentially, like, take smart risk, like take risks that feels appropriate to you. But to think that risk taking is only for the young really hampers you, right? I mean, so I just think what you're doing, at least you go for it, Leanne, and you go for opportunity, which I'd encourage even more people to be doing.
Well, even like I went on a walk today, I'm like, I need to be taking more risks and like being bolder. Cause I was just like, I think as you continue doing it, your risk tolerance possibly, it sounds counterintuitive because as you get older, I thought risk tolerance would go down. But for me, I'm just like, you get bored at a certain level. So you want to just keep amping it up. I think it's like skydivers who end up doing free diving, like all crazy things because their risk tolerance is so high. Yeah, it's actually really quite interesting. Are you noticing that people, as they progress, you talk about the whole decades thing, are people becoming less more risk averse as they get older?
People tend to, because, because we get locked into a lifestyle. That's a big part of it, right? And I also think, we humans don't like change. And this is what is part of the reason why I am working on sustainable ambition, is to raise people's awareness that, like, guess what? The world changes, you change, and your life changes. And so, it's not uncommon for me to have some coaching clients where they hit this inflection point, both in their life and or in their career, and they're shocked, and they're kind of like, wait, my values have changed, where I want to put my priorities and my energy have changed. Like, is this normal? And I'm like, it's normal. But we don't talk about it. And so people are caught off guard. And so I do think that it's something that people just need to pay attention. Again, it comes back to that paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk to me more about paying attention and that phrase. So what does that look like? So today I'm like, right, my goal is to pay more attention. What would I be doing? What would I be thinking about?
What's interesting about this is a couple of things. One is that it's somewhat intuitive and body focused, right? So oftentimes our body knows before our brain knows. And so, I've had a coaching client who has said, like, I just have this inkling in me. Like, I don't need to make a change right away, but I sense this coming on. Something's happening. I know I kind of need to start looking forward and starting to do the work to plan ahead. So she's at least in touch with herself to start to recognize that. And I think that's more of what we need to be doing. Like, because there starts to be a bodily sense, right? Or if you're starting to like get bored at work, or you're at the top of a growth curve and you're not learning anymore, these are times when you need to start paying attention to kind of like, hey, what might be next? What might be the next challenge? If you are even something as simple, it sounds simple, it may not be simple, but it's like, hey, I'm planning a family. What do my partner and I want our life to look like? How do we start to think about that and plan for that? Because I think people do need to plan ahead for some of these things.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because a lot of the time, sort of my solution has been, I just keep taking action, right? But they're just like, well, action in what direction? Like in what general direction, as opposed to just like doing a random assortment of things. And that's where I think that's a really important distinction, is you said like you're taking that time to think about it and plan. It's also, I remember back in one of my first jobs out of university, I remember waking up in the morning and feeling like my stomach, my shoulders, everything was heavy, struggled to get out of bed. And I'm like, this is not the right job for me. And I think it was just having that sense. But sometimes we often just try and knock it away going, oh, it's the weather, or I'm just, yeah. So it is hard. So that paying attention is, maybe worth sort of jotting down like how you're feeling every day, or even feeling, how you're feeling towards a certain meeting that you're going into. Is really important.
I think you can, to your point, Leanne, kind of track your energy, like where are you energized, where are you drained? And the other thing that I also really advocate is for people to pay attention to what you're curious about now. So one of the things I'm not as fond of as guidance is to say like, find your passion. And just because the passion word, it sounds singular. It's such a weighty thing, and there could be things like talking about this topic actually is a passion of mine. And yet, I think it's much more powerful and freeing to think about like, well, what are you curious about now? What do you want to learn more about? Because that can really start to foster where you might start to plant your seeds next.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And it's not about, what am I the expert on? It's like, what actually Penny Pierce was talking about her, and like, because so Kathy and I have caught up on a few different calls. Is like, I've been on Kathy's podcast and we had like a frientoring session together. So this is like our third or fourth time that we've had a conversation. But I was sharing, I think I had a chat to Penny Pierce, and she was saying, write a book about something that fascinates you. And it's like, of course, like, that was a revelation to me at the time, but it's like, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, if you're going to live with this topic and research it and what have you, it better fascinate you for sure.
Yeah, that's it. And I think often we try to write about, what have I done in the past that I'm proud of? But I don't know, for me, I just can't research the energy to do that. Like I've written art, like there's so many half-baked articles I've written that I think, oh, this is gold. I really should reinvigorate this and bring it up. I just can't muster up the energy to do it, because it's like, it's done. I don't know. Do you find that, or am I normal?
Oh, no. No, you're normal. Well, at least for me, no, it's kind of like the danger is if I research something and get to like satisfying my own curiosity, then I'm done. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So how do you take action when you've got an idea and you think, I really want to move forward with this? There might be a bit of risk involved. Like, what do you do to make that idea come to life?
This has actually been an interesting thing for me of late, because I typically am a highly motivated person, and I've not ever truly unpacked why. And yet of late, I've been getting a little stuck in some areas. And I've had my own coach kind of say to me, observing me from outside and also working alongside me, we both took this class together. And she said, you need to turn this into a project. And she said, you tend to seem to do really well when you have a project, you have deadlines, you have like these end goals and what have you. And I had never had, in all my years of working, I had never had that insight brought forward to me. And then I also recently was listening to a podcast. And also, I think I read this in a book actually, where they were talking about the personality scale and how one of them is around conscientiousness. Well, I am really high on conscientiousness. And so, and what they say is like, when you're conscientious, you also like, you want to follow a project plan. You want to dot the I's, cross the T's, or check things off. And I also have a high, like on strength finders, I'm high in responsibility. And so I'm realizing now, like I've been playing with this idea actually, Leanne, where I'm on these things where I'm getting a little stuck. I'm like, okay, I need to turn this into a project and actually create some action items to do's. Yeah. And I don't even know, to be honest, like I very well for some of these things, I'm like, you got to go join a class or some group or something where it's actually the external kind of due dates, because I don't know if I'm going to do it on my own, which is not like me. But again, in some of these areas where I'm getting a little bit more stuck, I'm like, maybe I do need to go ahead and have that kind of, I hate this term forcing functions that was used at one of my companies. And I was kind of like, why do you need forcing functions? And yet here you go. I'm starting to learn maybe this is why.
I totally need forcing functions. I really love this idea, Kathy. Like you can sort of like crack the recipe, like the project template for navigating like a career transition, or like what you pick up for your niche, and just have like your little, stages, milestones. And you created that for yourself, you got through, then you could sell that to other people. I mean, that is worth something. That is such a great idea, isn't it? Like creating a project plan. I'm the same as you. I need deadlines. I need public deadlines. Otherwise, I just will do anything else but what I need to do. I had a friend just on WhatsApp, and he had a book idea. So I'm like, oh, what are your book chapters? And he's like, I don't know yet. I just got the idea. I'm like, okay, so Friday we're going to share book chapter topics. Because I think we think that if we have more time, it will be better, but it's not the case, is it?
No,
You
no,
just keep
I
floating
actually,
around.
yeah, I think it's right. I think getting into action is better, as you said. So
Yeah. All right, Kathy, we'll move to the rapid round. So I'd love to know, what is a book that has shaped the way that you think?
So I'm going to cheat and give you two, but one is Making Great Choices by Jennifer Reel and Roger Martin, which just provides a framework for how to think about out of the box ideas. I'll leave it at that. And then the second one is Working Identity by Herminia Ibarra, which to me was kind of a really landmark book to me around career transition and the importance of trying on working identities before you jump into your final, like as you're making a career transition.
They both sound fantastic. What's a favorite app or tool that you'd recommend?
I didn't think I was going to like this app, but I actually love Voxer. So I'd highly recommend like some type of voice app.
Yes. Yeah, we could talk about voice for ages. I mean, we're both converts because we have podcasts and we listen to podcasts. What is a song that gets you fired up or focused or engaged?
So I had to use this song because I just recently saw Top Gun Maverick, but I really love Danger Zone from that movie.
How good was it when they opened up with that? That was
it's
so
amazing.
Good. It was amazing. Yep. Did you get chills? I got chills.
Yes. I just love watching the beginning of that movie purely for the opening sequence and the music.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. And I said to Chris, my husband, we have to go watch it again in the cinemas just to get that sound and that thumping feeling. Kathy, a favorite quote of yours you'd like to share?
So I love quotes, so it was a little hard to choose, but I'm going to share this one in the spirit of the name of this podcast, which is, this is from brother David Steindl. I'm going to say his name wrong. And I tried to write it down for myself to remind me, but Steindl Rost. So David Steindl Rost, he's a brother. And he says, the antidote to stress is not necessarily rest. The antidote to stress is wholehearted living.
That's magic. Yep. I got chills. Yep.
So essentially go live and work large to really, be the antidote to stress. It's not about just resting despite sustainable ambition, but I'm just saying like, there's something to this idea of wholehearted living that's really quite important.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for finding that, Kathy. If our listeners want to find out more, connect with you, listen to your podcast, where can we send them?
Yeah, they can find all of my different links and resources and the podcast, et cetera, at sustainableambition.com.
Amazing. Put that in the show notes. Kathy, I always love our conversations and I learn so much from you just through our great conversations. Thank you for being here today.
It's been wonderful, Leanne. Thanks so much for having me.